The city exhaled its chilly autumn breath, a plume of gray mist that swirled around the ankles of tailored suits and hurried footsteps. Julian Croft felt the cold not on his skin, insulated as he was by layers of cashmere and bespoke wool, but deep in the marrow of his bones. An old, familiar chill that had nothing to do with the weather. He strode from the monolithic glass tower, the polished marble of the lobby reflecting a distorted version of himself. A man elongated and severe, his features sharp and uncompromising. Behind him, the doors hissed shut, sealing away the remnants of a brutal but successful negotiation, the ghost of $1 billion deal hanging in the air like cigar smoke. His chauffeur, a stoic man named Arthur who had mastered the art of invisibility, held open the door to the waiting Rolls-Royce Phantom, a silent promise of a hermetically sealed world of leather and silence. Julian's gaze was fixed on the sanctuary of the vehicle, his mind already calculating the ripple effects of the day's victory on the Asian markets. He was a man who lived in the future, a landscape of numbers and projections. The present was merely a stepping stone, often an inconvenient one. That's when he saw her, a splash of color in a monochrome world. A little girl, no older than 7, sitting alone on a granite bench, her small shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She wore a bright yellow coat, a stark contrast to the city's muted palette. Her blonde hair, so fair it was almost white, was neatly brushed, catching the fading light. For a fleeting moment, Julian felt a spike of irritation. A crying child was a discordant note in the symphony of his meticulously ordered life. It was a problem, and he hated problems he couldn't solve with a wire transfer or a hostile takeover. He took a step toward the car, ready to leave the girl and her anonymous sorrow behind, a forgotten footnote in his day. But as he moved, his path intersected with her line of sight. He saw the tear-streaked fairness of her skin, the raw grief in her blue eyes. And then he saw her arm. Poking out from the cuff of her yellow coat was a small, delicate mark on her wrist. It wasn't a smudge of dirt or a temporary sticker. It was a tattoo. A small, 5-pointed star, inked in a deep, faded blue, with a tiny, perfect crescent moon nestled beside it. Julian stopped dead. The sounds of the city, the blare of horns, the distant wail of a siren, the murmur of the crowd, all faded into an impossible silence. The air grew thick, heavy. His multi-billion-dollar empire, the tower at his back, the phantom waiting at the curb. It all dissolved. There was only the girl and the impossible, undeniable symbol on her arm. A symbol that mirrored the one hidden beneath the cuff of his own $1,000 shirt. A secret he had carried for 2 decades like a shard of glass lodged near his heart. He felt the world tilt on its axis. The meticulously constructed fortress he had built around himself, brick by brick with ambition and ruthless efficiency, began to crumble. That star, that moon, it was a ghost from another life, a life he had buried under the weight of his success. It was a promise made in whispers, a pact sealed in a back-alley tattoo parlor when he was 17 and had nothing to his name but a fierce, desperate love for a girl with eyes the color of a summer storm. Amelia. Her name echoed in the silent chambers of his memory, a name he hadn't dared to speak aloud in 20 years. He believed she was gone, lost to the fire and smoke of a past he could never outrun. Yet, here was her legacy, her promise, etched into the skin of a crying child on a cold city street. Arthur, ever perceptive, noticed the change in his employer. The ramrod straight posture faltered, the forward momentum ceased. "Sir, is everything all right?" The chauffeur's voice was a low murmur, careful not to break the strange spell that had fallen over the billionaire. Julian didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat was tight, his mind a maelstrom of confusion and a terrifying, burgeoning hope that felt more painful than the decades of guilt. He took a tentative step toward the bench, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the pavement. The girl looked up, her sobs hitching in her chest as she saw the tall, imposing figure looming over her. She shrank back, clutching a worn, stuffed rabbit to her chest. Her fear was a physical blow, a reminder of the intimidating aura he cultivated, the very thing that kept the world at a safe, manageable distance. He needed to soften, to dismantle the armor he wore as a second skin. He crouched down, a gesture so foreign to him that his knees protested. The fine fabric of his trousers pulled taut. He was now at her eye level, trying to offer a smile that felt rusty and unused. "Hello," he said, his voice hoarse, stripped of its usual commanding tone. "Are you lost?" The girl sniffled, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "I can't find my mommy." Her voice was a tiny, fragile thing. Julian's heart, a dormant organ he used primarily for pumping blood, gave a painful lurch. "Your mommy," he repeated, the words tasting strange on his tongue. He gestured gently toward her wrist. "That's a very pretty mark on your arm." She glanced down at the tattoo, a flicker of familiarity in her tear-filled eyes. "Mommy has one, too. She says it's our secret star, so we can always find each other." A secret star. The phrase struck him with the force of a physical blow. It was what Amelia had called it. Our secret star, Julian. So no matter where we go, we can look at it and know we're not alone. He had been so alone. For 20 years he had been an island, surrounded by a sea of wealth and sycophants. He looked at the girl's face, searching for a trace of Amelia in her features, the shape of her eyes, the curve of her mouth. He saw nothing, and everything. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Lily," she said, her grip on the stuffed rabbit tightening. Lily, a name as delicate and beautiful as she was, as Amelia was. "Lily," he said, testing the name, letting it settle in the cavernous space of his chest. "My name is Julian, and I think I might know your mommy." A flicker of hope ignited in her blue eyes, so potent it almost brought him to his knees. In that moment, the deal he had just closed, the empire he commanded, the life he had so painstakingly built, all of it became secondary. A new, singular purpose took root in the barren soil of his soul. He had to find the woman who had haunted his every waking moment, the woman he thought he had lost forever. The little girl on the bench wasn't a problem to be ignored. She was a map. She was a miracle. And for the first time in a lifetime, Julian Croft had no idea where the road would lead. But he knew, with a certainty that eclipsed any business forecast, that he had to follow it. He carefully straightened up, his mind racing, shifting from corporate strategist to something else entirely, something more primal. He couldn't just take the girl. He couldn't frighten her further. He looked around, his sharp eyes scanning the bustling street. There were no frantic parents in sight, no one who seemed to be searching for a lost child. He turned back to Arthur, who stood by the open car door, his expression a perfect mask of professional neutrality, though Julian could see the flicker of concern in his eyes. "Arthur." Julian's voice was firm, back in its familiar register of command, but underscored with a new, raw urgency. "Cancel my evening, all of it. Get me Marcus on the line, now." Marcus Thorne was the head of his personal security, a man who specialized in making the impossible happen discreetly. Within moments, Julian was speaking into his phone, his voice low and intense. "Marcus, I have a situation, a missing person case. It's personal. I need your best team. No, not the corporate espionage unit. I need the trackers, the ones who found that shell company in the Caymans. I'm sending you a photo, a symbol, a tattoo. I need you to find a woman with this mark. Her name might be Amelia. I don't have a last name, not one that would be current anyway." He paused, taking a discreet photo of Lily's wrist with his phone. "And I have a child here. Her name is Lily. She's lost. We need to find her mother. Discreetly, Marcus. No police, not yet. I want this handled internally, the utmost priority. Nothing else matters." While he was on the phone, a young woman in a police uniform approached, her expression a mixture of authority and concern. "Sir, is everything okay here? We had a call about a child left unattended." Julian ended his call with a final, sharp, "Handle it," and turned his attention to the officer. He projected an aura of calm authority, the kind that money and power afforded. "Officer, thank you for your concern. I just found this little girl, Lily. She's lost her mother. My driver was just about to take us to the nearest precinct." He offered a disarming, practiced smile. The policewoman assessed the scene. The impeccably dressed man, the gleaming Rolls-Royce, the crying child who now seemed a little less frightened. She nodded. "All right, sir. Do you know her name?" "Lily," Julian said again. "She's a brave little girl." He then did something that surprised even himself. He reached out and gently rested a hand on Lily's shoulder. The contact was electric, a jolt of connection that short-circuited 2 decades of emotional detachment. "We'll find your mommy, Lily. I promise." He looked her directly in the eyes. And in that moment, the promise was not just to a lost child, but to the ghost of a teenage boy who had made another promise long ago, under a sky full of stars he couldn't see from the city. The policewoman, satisfied, took some notes and radioed in the information, directing them to the local precinct. Julian guided Lily toward the car, his hand still on her shoulder. As she slid onto the plush leather seat, her small form almost swallowed by its luxury, she looked up at him, her blue eyes wide and questioning. "Do you have a secret star, too?" she asked, her voice small and hopeful. Julian's carefully maintained composure fractured. He unfastened the cuff of his shirt and pulled back the sleeve, revealing the faded blue ink on his own wrist, the star and moon, identical to hers, a mirror image across time and tragedy. Her eyes widened in astonishment, a tiny gasp escaping her lips. For the first time, a small, watery smile touched her face. "You do," she whispered, a note of wonder in her voice. "You really do." As the car pulled away from the curb, gliding silently into the river of traffic, Julian looked at the matching marks. The tattoo had once been a symbol of his greatest love. For 20 years it had been a brand of his deepest failure. Now sitting next to this small, miraculous child, it felt like something else entirely. It felt like a compass. And it was finally pointing him home. The police precinct was a sterile, impersonal place, smelling of disinfectant and bureaucracy. It was a world away from Julian's usual environment of bespoke boardrooms and exclusive clubs. Here, his wealth and influence were reduced to a name on a form. He watched as Lily, clutching her stuffed rabbit, was gently questioned by a kind-faced child services worker. He had given his statement, a carefully edited version of events that omitted the earth-shattering significance of the tattoo. To the world, he was simply a concerned citizen who had found a lost child. But inside, he was a man unmoored, adrift on a sea of possibilities he hadn't allowed himself to imagine for 2 decades. Marcus Thorne arrived within 20 minutes, a whirlwind of quiet efficiency. He was a former intelligence officer, a man who moved with a calm, predatory grace. He listened intently as Julian recounted the story again, this time with the raw, unfiltered truth. He showed Marcus the picture of Lily's tattoo, then his own. Marcus's expression remained impassive, but Julian saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He knew Julian's history, the broad strokes of it at least. He knew about the fire, The girl who was lost. The guilt that fueled the billionaire's relentless ambition. Amelia, Julian said, the name feeling like a foreign object in his mouth. Her name was Amelia Vance, but that was 20 years ago. She would have changed it. She would have thought I was dead too. The lie came easily, a well-worn groove in his mind. It was simpler than the truth, which was that he had been at a meeting, chasing a dream, while her world burned. "We'll find her," Marcus said with quiet confidence. "We have the girl's name, Lily. We have the tattoo. We have a starting point. My team is already scrubbing CCTV footage from the area where you found her. We're running facial recognition against every database we have access to, legal and otherwise. We'll find a match." Julian nodded, but his mind was a chaotic landscape of memory. He was no longer in the precinct. He was 17 again, the city lights a distant blur from the rooftop of their derelict apartment building. Amelia was beside him, her head on his shoulder, her laughter like wind chimes. "It has to be a star," she'd said, tracing the design on a napkin from the diner where she worked. "Because that's what you are, Julian. You're going to be a star. You're going to get out of this place and shine so bright." "Only if you're with me," he'd answered, his voice thick with the certainty of youth. "We're a constellation, you and me. The star and the moon. Always together." The memory was so vivid he could almost smell the cheap perfume she wore, a scent of synthetic gardenias that he had found intoxicating. He was pulled back to the present by the social worker's voice. "Mr. Croft, we've arranged for Lily to be placed in a temporary foster home for the night. We'll continue the search for her mother in the morning." A visceral, protective instinct surged through Julian, so powerful it startled him. "No," he said, the word sharp and absolute. Every head in the small office turned to him. "She's not going with a stranger." The social worker blinked, taken aback. "Sir, it's standard procedure. We have accredited and safe homes." "I have a home," Julian cut in, his voice leaving no room for argument. "I have a staff. Nannies, tutors, cooks. She'll be safer and more comfortable with me until her mother is found. I'll undergo any background check you require. It will be expedited. Marcus," he said, turning to his security head, "make it happen." Marcus was already on his phone, his voice a low, persuasive murmur, leveraging the full weight of Julian Croft's name and resources. Bureaucratic hurdles that would take weeks for ordinary people to navigate were dismantled in minutes. Legal waivers were drafted, emergency custody papers were filed, and a judge was woken from a late dinner to sign the order. Within 2 hours, Julian was walking out of the precinct with Lily, her small hand now tucked securely in his. The city seemed different now, the lights softer, the noise less abrasive. His world had been irrevocably altered. The phantom, once a symbol of his isolation, now felt like a cocoon, protecting this precious, fragile link to his past. He lived in a sprawling penthouse that occupied the top 3 floors of the tallest residential building in the city. It was a monument to minimalist design and extravagant emptiness, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a god's-eye view of the metropolis below. It was a space designed for one person, a place where he could be alone with his success and his ghosts. Lily stood in the center of the vast living room, her small yellow coat a beacon of life in the sterile, museum-like space. She looked up at the high ceilings, the abstract art on the walls, the cold, gleaming surfaces. "Is this your house?" she asked, her voice filled with awe. "Yes," Julian replied, feeling a sudden, acute sense of shame. It wasn't a house. It was a vault. It was where he stored his wealth, not where he lived his life. He had a housekeeper, a formidable woman named Mrs. Gable, who ran the penthouse with military precision. She appeared as if from nowhere, her expression one of controlled surprise at the unexpected arrival of a small child. "Mrs. Gable," Julian said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "This is Lily. She will be staying with us for a while. Please, could you prepare the guest suite and perhaps find something for her to eat? Something a child would like." Mrs. Gable, who had worked for him for 10 years and had never seen him interact with another human being outside of a business context, simply nodded. "Of course, Mr. Croft. Macaroni and cheese, perhaps?" Lily's eyes lit up. "With extra cheese?" "With all the cheese you could possibly want," Mrs. Gable said, a rare, genuine smile gracing her lips. While Lily was occupied with her dinner in the state-of-the-art kitchen, Julian retreated to his office, a room that felt more like a command center. A large screen on the wall displayed a dozen feeds from Marcus's team. They had isolated the CCTV footage. It showed a woman, her face obscured by a hat and the angle of the camera, walking with Lily, holding her hand. They entered a crowded department store. Minutes later, the footage showed Lily exiting the store, alone and crying. The woman never came out. "She abandoned her," Marcus said over the secure line, his voice grim. "The footage from inside the store is corrupted, a convenient technical glitch. This was planned." The words were like a punch to the gut. Abandoned her? Amelia? The Amelia he knew would have walked through fire for someone she loved. She had walked through fire. "No," Julian said, his voice low. "That's not her. It can't be. Julian, the evidence. The evidence is wrong," he snapped. "Keep looking. Search the store's employee records. Check every homeless shelter, every hospital, every morgue in this city. I want her found." He spent the rest of the night in that chair, watching the screens, fueled by coffee and a desperate, gnawing fear. He watched his team of highly paid experts chase shadows through the digital veins of the city. He listened to them run into dead ends and false leads. And with every passing hour, the terrifying hope that had bloomed in his chest began to wither, replaced by the familiar cold of despair. Around 3 a.m., he walked out of his office, the silence of the penthouse pressing in on him. He walked to the guest suite, a room so pristine it looked like a hotel showroom. He pushed the door open a crack. In the soft glow of a nightlight, he saw Lily curled up in the center of the enormous bed, her stuffed rabbit nestled under her arm. She looked so small, so vulnerable. He stood there for a long time, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest. This little girl, who carried his past in the ink on her skin, had been left alone in a city of millions. Why? The question tormented him. He thought of Amelia, of her fierce loyalty, her unwavering belief in him. Could 20 years have changed her so much? Or was there something else at play, something darker and more complex than simple abandonment? He felt a profound, aching sense of responsibility. He had failed Amelia once. He would not fail her daughter. He walked over to the bed and gently pulled the duvet up to her chin. His fingers brushed against her hair, as soft as silk. In her sleep, she stirred and murmured a single word. "Mommy." The word hung in the silent room, a testament to a love that was somewhere out there in the cold, dark city. And Julian Croft, the man who had everything, realized he was searching for the only thing that had ever mattered. He went back to his office, the first rays of dawn beginning to streak the sky, and resumed his vigil. The search for Amelia Vance had just begun. The next few days passed in a blur of surreal domesticity and high-stakes investigation. Julian's life, once a rigid, predictable schedule of meetings and market analyses, was thrown into chaos. He postponed a trip to Tokyo, canceled board meetings, and ignored the increasingly frantic calls from his COO. His entire focus had narrowed to the 2 screens in his office, one displaying the real-time progress of Marcus's search, the other a live feed from a nanny cam in the penthouse's living room, where Lily was being entertained by a succession of tutors, child psychologists, and even a bewildered magician he'd hired on a whim. He was trying to build a fortress of normalcy and comfort around the little girl, a desperate attempt to shield her from the uncertainty of her situation, and perhaps to shield himself from the terrifying depths of his own emotions. He learned that Lily was allergic to peanuts, that she loved the color purple, and that she believed her stuffed rabbit, whom she called Barnaby, could understand everything she said. These small, intimate details were like foreign treasures, artifacts from a world he had never known. He found himself mesmerized by her simple, unvarnished view of the world. She would ask him questions no one had dared to ask him in years. "Why is your house so big? Don't you ever get lonely? Why do you always look so sad?" He had no easy answers. His vast, empty home suddenly seemed absurd. His solitude, once a choice, now felt like a prison. And the sadness she saw in his eyes was a truth he had long denied. He was sad. He was profoundly, achingly lonely. Marcus's team worked around the clock, chasing down every conceivable lead. They had identified the woman in the CCTV footage, not as Amelia, but as a low-level career criminal named Carla Higgins, a woman known for petty scams and confidence tricks. They found her in a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, but she was of no help. She claimed she had been paid a few $100s by a woman in a park to babysit Lily for an hour and then leave her in a busy public place. She never saw the woman's face clearly. She wore a scarf and sunglasses. She couldn't provide a useful description. It was a dead end. The story was a fabrication, but a well-constructed one, designed to muddy the waters and send them down a false trail. The team's analysis of the department store's corrupted security footage revealed it had been wiped by a professional, someone who knew their way around complex security systems. This wasn't a simple case of a desperate mother abandoning her child. This was something else, something calculated. Julian's frustration mounted with each passing day. He felt powerless, a feeling he despised. He could move markets with a single phone call, but he couldn't find one woman in a single city. He pored over every detail of Amelia's life that he could remember, feeding them to Marcus's team. The name of the orphanage where they grew up, St. Jude's Home for Children. The diner where she worked her first job. The cheap apartment building that had been their first home, and her supposed grave. The investigators visited St. Jude's, now a modernized community center. The old records were long gone, digitized and then lost in a server migration. They found the diner, but it had changed hands 3 times. The apartment building had been torn down years ago, replaced by a luxury condominium. The address was a ghost, just like Amelia. Julian's nights were sleepless, haunted by the past. He would wake up in a cold sweat, the smell of smoke in his nostrils, the phantom sound of Amelia screaming his name. The guilt was a physical entity, a beast with claws that tore at him in the darkness. He had been 18, consumed by a burning ambition to escape the poverty that had defined his life. He had been offered a chance, an internship with a ruthless, brilliant investor. The meeting was on a Friday night. He was supposed to be home with Amelia, celebrating their 1-year anniversary of moving into their own place. He'd told her he had to go, that it was their future. She had been disappointed but had smiled and told him to go, to be brilliant. "Just come home safe," she'd said, kissing him at the door. "You're my home, Julian." He never came home. The fire started in the apartment below theirs, faulty wiring in a tenement building that was a tinderbox. By the time he heard the news hours later, the building was a smoldering ruin. The fire department had a list of the dead. Amelia Vance was on it. He had identified a body, a charred, unrecognizable form, a small piece of melted jewelry, a cheap locket he had given her, clutched in a blackened hand. He had collapsed. The grief was a black hole that threatened to swallow him whole. His ambition became his life raft. He threw himself into his work with a ferocious, self-destructive energy. He worked to forget, to numb the pain, to build a monument of success so high that it would block out the sun, block out the memory of her face. And now, that monument was nothing but a hollow shell. The woman he had mourned for 20 years might be alive. The body he had identified might not have been hers. The locket. Anyone could have had a similar locket. The entire foundation of his adult life, built on that single, tragic event, was a lie. One afternoon, he was in his office staring at a map of the city dotted with red markers indicating failed leads, when Lily patted in, holding a drawing. "I made this for you," she said, handing him the piece of paper. It was a crayon drawing of 2 stick figures, a big one and a little one. They were holding hands. Above their heads were a crudely drawn star and a crescent moon. "It's you and me," she explained, "and our secret star." Julian stared at the drawing, a lump forming in his throat. He saw the innocence in her art, the simple, profound connection she had forged with him in just a few days. He had been so focused on the search, on the logistics and the strategy, that he had almost missed the miracle in front of him. This child, this beautiful, brave little girl, was his. He didn't know how, but he felt it in his soul. She was a part of him, a part of Amelia. "It's beautiful, Lily," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." He decided to change his approach. The brute force method of data analysis and surveillance wasn't working. He needed to think like Amelia. He needed to go back to the places that mattered to them. "Arthur," he said into the intercom, "get the car ready and pack a small bag for Lily. We're going on a trip." He wasn't sure where he was going, but he knew he couldn't stay in the penthouse, a prisoner in his golden cage, any longer. He needed to walk the streets they had walked, to breathe the air they had breathed. He took Lily to the park near the old orphanage, a place where he and Amelia had spent countless hours dreaming of a future they never got to have. He pushed her on the swings, just as he had pushed Amelia, her laughter echoing the ghost of another's. He bought her a hot dog from a street vendor, just as they had done when they scraped together enough change. He was retracing the steps of his past, not as a billionaire, but as the boy he had been. As he sat on a park bench watching Lily chase pigeons, his phone buzzed. It was Marcus. "We've got something," Marcus said, his voice tense with excitement. "It's a long shot, Julian, but it's the first real lead we've had." "What is it?" Julian asked, his heart pounding. "The social worker. The one who did your emergency custody paperwork. She's been with the city's family services department for 30 years. My team was doing a deep dive background check on her, just as a precaution. We found something in her old case files, hard copies from 2 decades ago that were never digitized. A fire at a tenement building. A Jane Doe survivor, 18 years old, severe burns, smoke inhalation, and trauma-induced amnesia." Julian stood up, his legs unsteady. "Amelia," he breathed. "The file says the girl was in a coma for weeks," Marcus continued. "When she woke up, she had no memory of her name, her past, nothing. She had a unique tattoo on her wrist, a star and a crescent moon. The social worker, a rookie back then, took a special interest in her case. She helped her through her recovery. When the girl was released, with no memory and no one to claim her, she chose a new name for herself. She wanted a name that sounded like a new beginning." Julian held his breath, the entire world narrowing to the sound of Marcus's voice on the phone. "What name did she choose, Marcus?" "She named herself Hope." The word hung in the air, a beacon in the twilight of his despair. Hope. It was so like her. Even with nothing left, she had chosen hope. "There's more," Marcus said. The social worker remembered a conversation she had with Hope years later. The girl's memory was starting to come back in fragments, like a dream. She remembered a boy named Julian. She remembered a promise. She remembered a fire. She thought he had died in it. She was devastated. She told the social worker she had to leave the city, that it was full of ghosts. She talked about wanting to live somewhere quiet, by the water, maybe open a small bakery. She mentioned a town by name, a place she and this Julian used to dream about. Julian's knees felt weak. He knew the town. It was a place they had seen in a travel magazine at a library once, a world away from the grit and grime of their reality. A sleepy coastal town called Port Blossom. "Where is she, Marcus?" Julian demanded, his voice a raw plea. "The social worker lost touch with her over a decade ago," Marcus said, his voice softening. "But for a few years she sent a Christmas card every year. The postmark was always the same." Julian closed his eyes, the name of the town a prayer on his lips. Port Blossom. The drive to Port Blossom was 5 hours of agonizing anticipation. Julian sat in the back of the Maybach. He'd switched from the rolls for a less conspicuous vehicle, with Lily sleeping peacefully in her car seat beside him, her head lolling to the side. He watched the city's steel and glass skyline recede in the rearview mirror, replaced by the greens and browns of the countryside. With every mile that passed, he felt like he was traveling back in time, shedding the layers of the man he had become to find the boy he had been. He was terrified. What if he found her and she didn't remember him? What if she had built a new life, a new family, and he was just a ghost from a past she had survived? What if she hated him for not being there, for not saving her? The questions were a relentless assault on his fragile hope. But then he would look at Lily, at the perfect, innocent curve of her cheek, and he knew he had to face whatever came next. She was the living, breathing proof that some part of Amelia had survived, had endured, had loved again. When they finally arrived in Port Blossom, it was late afternoon. The town was exactly as he had pictured it from that faded magazine 20 years ago. A quaint storybook village nestled by the sea. The air smelled of salt and freshly baked bread. Colorful storefronts lined a cobblestone main street, and fishing boats bobbed gently in the harbor. It was a world of impossible peace, a stark contrast to the relentless forward momentum of his own life. Marcus's team had done their work. They had located a small bakery on the main street called the Rising Loaf. It was owned by a woman named Hope Anderson. She had a 7-year-old daughter named Lily. Julian parked the car a block away from the bakery. His hands were sweating, his heart hammering against his ribs. He felt more nervous than he had before any multi-billion-dollar negotiation. This was a different kind of deal, one where the currency was not money, but memory and forgiveness. He woke Lily gently. "We're here, sweetheart." She blinked sleepily, looking out the window at the charming street. "It's pretty." "Yes, it is," Julian said, his voice tight. "Lily, we're going to go into that little bakery. I think your mommy might be in there." Her eyes went wide, a mixture of excitement and fear. "Really?" "I think so," he said, trying to keep his own emotions in check. He took her hand, her small fingers wrapping trustingly around his. They walked down the street, the sound of a distant seagull crying overhead. The bell above the door of the Rising Loaf tinkled cheerfully as they entered. The shop was warm and inviting, filled with the heavenly scent of yeast and sugar. Sunlight streamed through the large front window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Behind the counter, a woman was arranging a tray of croissants. Her back was to them. She had blonde hair, streaked with a little more gold than he remembered, tied back in a messy bun. She wore a simple white apron dusted with flour. "Be with you in just a moment," she called out, her voice warm and friendly. a voice he had heard only in his dreams for 2 decades. And then she turned. The world stopped. It was her, Amelia. Hope. She was older, of course. There were fine lines around her eyes the color of a summer storm. A faint silvery scar traced a path from her temple down her cheek, a ghost of the fire. But it was her. The same gentle curve of her lips, the same kindness in her expression. She saw Lily first. Her face broke into a radiant smile of pure relief and love. "Oh, my baby! Lily! I was so worried." She rushed from behind the counter, dropping to her knees to envelop Lily in a fierce hug. "Mommy, I missed you," Lily cried, burying her face in her mother's shoulder. Amelia, he couldn't think of her as Hope, held her daughter tight, murmuring words of love and reassurance. "I'm so sorry, sweetie. I had to. I had to do something. I knew you'd be safe. I knew he would find you." She looked up then, her gaze shifting from Lily to the tall, dark-haired man standing silently by the door. Her eyes met Julian's. The smile on her face faltered. Her expression shifted through a storm of emotions: confusion, disbelief, recognition, and a deep, soul-shattering pain. She saw him, truly saw him, and in her eyes he saw the flicker of a memory, a ghost of a boy on a rooftop, making a promise. "Julian?" she whispered, the name a fragile thing, a question and an accusation, all at once. Her hand went to her own wrist, her thumb tracing the outline of a star and a moon hidden beneath her sleeve. Julian couldn't speak. The words were lodged in his throat, a dam of 20 years of unspoken grief and guilt. He could only nod, his eyes burning with unshed tears. He saw the story he had told himself crumble to dust. She hadn't forgotten him. She hadn't died. She had remembered him, and she had left him. The pain of that realization was sharper than any grief he had ever known. Lily, sensing the immense, unspoken weight in the room, looked back and forth between the two adults. She tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mommy," she said, her small voice cutting through the silence. "He has one too. A secret star. Just like us." She pointed at Julian. Amelia's gaze followed her daughter's finger, then dropped to Julian's wrist, where he had unconsciously pushed back his sleeve. She saw the faded ink, the symbol of their shared past. The dam broke. Tears streamed down her face, tears of sorrow, of shock, of a love that had been buried but had never died. "You're alive," she choked out, the words a sob. "All this time. I thought you were gone." The bakery, with its warm, sweet smells, became a sacred space, a nexus where the past and present collided with the force of an earthquake. The little bell on the door was silent. The world outside ceased to exist. There were only 3 people, a constellation of a man, a woman, and a child, bound together by a secret star and a love that had refused to be extinguished by fire or time. The story, Amelia, Hope, told was a mosaic of fragmented memories and painful choices. She pieced it together for him in the small apartment above the bakery, a cozy, cluttered space filled with books, plants, and the lingering scent of cinnamon. Lily, exhausted by the emotional turmoil, had fallen asleep on the sofa, her rabbit Barnaby held tight against her chest. Amelia sat across from Julian at a small wooden table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, her eyes never leaving his face, as if she were afraid he might disappear. "When I woke up in the hospital," she began, her voice low, "I was a blank slate. I didn't know my own name. The doctors said it was trauma, the fire, the smoke. They showed me my reflection, and I didn't recognize the person staring back. The scars were still fresh. The only thing that felt real was the tattoo." She glanced down at her wrist. "I would trace it for hours. It felt like a clue, but I didn't know what it was a clue to. The social worker, Eleanor. She was so kind. She helped me learn to be a person again. Her memory returned slowly, painfully, over the course of years. Flashes of a boy's face, the feeling of his hand in hers, the sound of his laugh. I remembered a rooftop, she said, her eyes distant, and stars. I remembered a fire. I remembered screaming a name. Julian. When your name came back to me, it was like a key turning in a lock. I went to the library, to the newspaper archives. I found the article about the fire. It listed the victims. Julian Croft was one of them. Julian's blood ran cold. He had been listed as missing, presumed dead for the first 24 hours, until his mentor, the investor who had given him his start, had pulled strings to report him as safe. But Amelia would have only seen that initial report. "I thought I had lost you," she whispered, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. The grief, it was like a second fire. I felt so alone. Eleanor, the social worker, she had told me about the people who claimed my body, who identified me from a locket. I didn't understand. I felt like a ghost. I decided I had to leave the city. It was haunted by you. I came here to Port Blossom. It was a place. It was a place I remembered dreaming about with you. Julian's throat was so tight he could barely breathe. The body. I identified the body, Amelia. They found a locket. "I lost that locket a week before the fire," she said softly. "It must have fallen, gotten swept into someone else's room. It was a girl from down the hall, Maria. She didn't make it out." The weight of it crashed down on him. He had mourned the wrong person. He had built his entire life on a foundation of a tragic mistake. "Why didn't you look for me?" he asked, the question raw with 2 decades of pain. "Why leave Lily? Look for a ghost?" she replied, her voice tinged with a bitter sadness. "And Lily? Julian, that's more complicated." She took a deep breath. "After I left the city, I tried to build a life, but I was always looking over my shoulder. A few years ago, strange things started happening. People asking questions about me in my old neighborhood, a man trying to break into my apartment. I felt like I was being hunted. I found out. I found out my father wasn't who I thought he was." She explained that through her search for her own identity, she had discovered she was the illegitimate daughter of a very wealthy, very dangerous man who had recently passed away, leaving behind a contested inheritance. Her half-siblings were ruthless and would stop at nothing to keep her from claiming what was rightfully hers. "They found me, Julian. They threatened me. They threatened Lily. They said they would make us disappear." I was terrified. I knew I had to get Lily somewhere safe, somewhere they wouldn't look for her. And then, I saw you. Julian was stunned. "You saw me?" "On the cover of a magazine, in a grocery store checkout line. Julian Croft, the billionaire who conquered the world." I thought I was hallucinating. "You were supposed to be dead. I read the article. It talked about your past, about the fire, about the girl you lost. It talked about your guilt. And I understood. You had survived, just like me. And you had become this." She gestured around, though he knew she meant his entire life, his empire. "I saw how powerful you were, how protected, and I thought, he's the only one who can keep her safe. My half-siblings would never dare to cross a man like you. So I made a plan. The hardest plan of my life. I hired that woman, Carla. I gave her money and a story to tell. I knew your security would be good, that they would find her story flimsy. I wiped the security footage myself. I picked up a few skills over the years. I needed to create a mystery, to make sure you, and only you, would be the one to find her. I needed you to take her in, to protect her. It was a desperate gamble. I watched from across the street. I saw you stop. I saw you look at her tattoo. And I knew. I knew my Julian was still in there somewhere. Her confession was a torrent, washing away all of his anger and replacing it with a profound, humbling understanding. She hadn't abandoned him. She hadn't abandoned their daughter. She had been protecting them both in the only way she knew how. She had trusted him, even after 20 years of silence. "Our daughter," Julian said, the words feeling momentous, holy. Amelia gave him a small, sad smile. "Yes, Julian, she's yours. I found out I was pregnant a few weeks after the fire, while I was still in the hospital. She's the best part of me. The best part of us. She has your eyes, you know. Not the color, but the intensity. She sees everything." He looked over at the sleeping child, his daughter, and a wave of love so fierce and absolute washed over him that it left him breathless. He had a daughter. He was a father. All the years of emptiness, of hollow victories and meaningless acquisitions suddenly seemed like a foolish waste. He had been chasing ghosts when a living, breathing miracle was waiting for him. He stood up and walked over to Amelia, kneeling in front of her chair, taking her hands in his. Her hands were not the soft, delicate hands he remembered. They were the hands of a baker, strong and capable, dusted with flour, and marked by small burns. They were the most beautiful hands he had ever seen. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry I didn't look harder. I'm sorry I gave up. I should have known. In my heart, I should have known you were alive." She squeezed his hands, her tears falling freely now. "We both thought the other was gone. We both did what we had to do to survive. You built an empire. I built a life. And we made her." They stayed like that for a long time, kneeling on the floor of the small apartment, the sleeping child on the sofa, a silent testament to their shared past and their possible future. The silence wasn't empty. It was filled with 20 years of unspoken words, of grief, regret, and a resilient, stubborn love. In the morning, Julian called Marcus. "Call it off," he said. "The search is over, but the work is just beginning. I want a full security detail in Port Blossom. Eyes on but invisible. I want you to dig into the estate of a man named." Amelia gave him the name, and he relayed it to his security chief. "Find out everything you can about his children. I want to know their weaknesses, their secrets, everything. We're not going to hide anymore. We're going to fight." When he hung up the phone, he felt a shift inside him. The weight of his guilt had not vanished, but it had transformed. It was no longer an anchor dragging him down, but a stone in his foundation, a reminder of what was at stake. Amelia was making breakfast, humming a tune he vaguely recognized. Lily was awake, sitting at the table, coloring in her drawing of the two stick figures. She had added a third figure between them, a woman with long yellow hair. The family. He walked over to the table and sat down next to his daughter. "Good morning," he said, his voice softer than he thought possible. "Good morning, Daddy," Lily replied without looking up, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The word struck him with a quiet, devastating force. "Daddy." He looked at Amelia, who was watching them with a warm, knowing smile. In her eyes, he didn't see a billionaire or a corporate titan. He saw Julian. Just Julian. The boy she had loved, the man she had trusted to protect their child. He knew the road ahead would be difficult. There were legal battles to be fought, dangers to be faced, and 20 years of lost time to reconcile. His life in the city, his company, his entire identity would have to be reshaped. But for the first time in as long as he could remember, he wasn't afraid. He had spent half his life building a kingdom of solitude. Now in a small bakery in a sleepy coastal town, he had found his home. He reached out and put his hand next to Lily's on the table, his faded tattoo a whisper away from the crayon drawing of a star and a moon. He was no longer just a star, shining alone in the cold, dark sky. He was part of a constellation, and his world was finally, irrevocably, brilliantly bright. The days that followed were an education in a life Julian had only ever observed from a distance. He learned the rhythm of the bakery, the pre-dawn hours when Amelia would knead the dough, the smell of fresh bread filling the air as the sun rose over the harbor, the morning rush of locals coming in for their coffee and pastries, the quiet afternoons spent preparing for the next day. He traded his tailored suits for jeans and sweaters, his boardroom for a flour-dusted kitchen. He learned how to score a baguette, how to pipe cream into an eclair, how to wash dishes without complaining. He was clumsy and inept at first, a titan of industry humbled by a sourdough starter. But he learned. He was a quick study, and for the first time, he was learning something that felt real, something that nourished more than just his bank account. He was learning what it meant to be a partner, to be a father. He walked Lily to school every morning, a small preschool run by a cheerful woman with rosy cheeks. He held his daughter's hand, a simple act that filled him with a sense of purpose more profound than any corporate acquisition. He would watch her run to her friends, a bright, happy child, and feel a fierce, protective love that was both terrifying and exhilarating. He was an object of intense curiosity in Port Blossom, the locals whispered, their gazes following the stranger in the expensive car who was suddenly bagging croissants and reading bedtime stories to Hope Anderson's little girl. But Amelia, or Hope as they knew her, was beloved in the town, and her quiet acceptance of Julian was enough to quell most of the gossip. He was simply Lily's father, a man who had come home. While he was rediscovering the simple joys of a normal life, Marcus and his team were waging a silent war on his behalf. They unearthed every sordid detail of Amelia's half-siblings' lives: gambling debts, illicit affairs, shady business dealings. They compiled a dossier of leverage so potent it could ruin them 10 times over. Julian met with his lawyers, a team of sharks who usually specialized in corporate litigation. He presented them with Amelia's case, the proof of her paternity, and the threats against her and Lily. They drew up a plan, not for a quiet settlement, but for a decisive public victory. One evening, as Julian and Amelia were cleaning up the bakery after closing, he told her his plan. "We're not going to let them intimidate us anymore," he said, his voice firm. "We're going to take back what's yours. We're going to ensure they can never harm you or Lily again." Amelia looked at him, her expression a mixture of fear and resolve. "I don't care about the money, Julian." "I know," he said gently. "This isn't about the money. It's about security. It's about justice. It's about showing them and the world that you are not someone to be trifled with, that our daughter is not to be threatened." He saw the flicker of the old Amelia in her eyes, the fierce, resilient girl who had faced down the world with nothing but her own strength. She nodded. "Okay, what do we do?" The battle was swift and brutal. Julian didn't fight them in the shadows. He brought the fight into the light. He arranged for a press conference, standing beside Amelia as she told her story, her voice clear and strong. He released the information Marcus had gathered, watching as the media frenzy tore apart the carefully constructed lives of her half-siblings. Their empire, built on intimidation and greed, crumbled in a matter of days. Faced with public disgrace and criminal investigations, they capitulated completely, surrendering Amelia's full inheritance and agreeing to a legally binding restraining order that would keep them 1,000 miles away from her and Lily for the rest of their lives. It was a victory, but Julian felt none of the familiar thrill of conquest. His only satisfaction came from the look of relief on Amelia's face, the knowledge that his family was finally, truly safe. With the threat gone, they were left with the quiet, complicated task of building a future. One night, after they had put Lily to bed, they sat on the small balcony of the apartment, overlooking the moonlit harbor. "What happens now?" Amelia asked softly. "You have your company, your life in the city. You can't just stay here forever, playing baker." Julian looked out at the water, the gentle lapping of the waves a soothing balm. "I sold my company," he said, his voice even. Amelia's head snapped toward him, her eyes wide with shock. "You what?" "Julian, your empire. It was your life's work." "No," he corrected her. "It was my life's distraction. It was the thing I built to forget you. Now that I have you back, I don't need it anymore." He had, in fact, orchestrated the largest management buyout in corporate history, selling his controlling stake to his executive board. He kept a significant share, enough to ensure his family's financial security for generations. But he had relinquished control. He was no longer the king. "My life isn't in the city anymore, Amelia," he continued, turning to face her. "My life is wherever you and Lily are. If that's here in this bakery, then this is where I belong." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He didn't kneel. He didn't make a grand gesture. He just sat there, beside her, and opened the box. Inside was a simple, elegant ring, a single perfect diamond flanked by a tiny, star-shaped sapphire and a crescent moon-shaped pearl. "I was a stupid kid, Amelia," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I made a promise to you on a rooftop, and then I broke it. I let my ambition get in the way. I wasn't there when you needed me. I've spent 20 years regretting that. Let me spend the rest of my life making it up to you. Marry me. Be my family. Let me be the man I was always supposed to be." Tears streamed down Amelia's face as she looked from the ring to his earnest, hopeful eyes. "Oh, Julian," she whispered, "you never broke your promise. You just got lost. And now you're home." She threw her arms around his neck, and her yes was lost in a kiss that tasted of salt and sugar, a kiss that held the weight of 20 years of sorrow and the sweet, brilliant promise of a new beginning. Their wedding was a small, simple affair, held on the beach at sunrise. Lily was the flower girl, scattering purple petals on the sand. The entire town of Port Blossom seemed to be in attendance, a testament to the life and community Amelia had built. Julian, who had once commanded armies of employees, stood on the shore with his small family, feeling more powerful and more complete than he ever had in any boardroom. He didn't erase his past. He integrated it. He established a foundation, funded by the sale of his company, dedicated to helping at-risk youth and reforming the foster care system, naming the foundation after St. Jude's. He used his wealth not to accumulate more, but to build, to heal, to make a difference. His days were filled with the simple, beautiful rhythm of life, baking bread with his wife, teaching his daughter how to ride a bike, walking on the beach at sunset. He had found that the greatest luxury in the world was not a private jet or a penthouse apartment, but time. Time with the people he loved. One afternoon, a few years later, he was sitting on a park bench watching Lily, now a confident 10-year-old, playing with her friends. Amelia came and sat beside him, leaning her head on his shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. He looked down at his wrist, at the faded blue tattoo. Then he looked at hers. "I was just thinking about our secret star," he said, a smile playing on his lips. "It really worked. It brought me back to you." "It was never about the star, Julian," she said softly, lacing her fingers through his. "It was about the promise. and we never gave up on that. He looked at his wife, at his daughter, at the peaceful, happy life they had built together from the ashes of their past. He was no longer the billionaire who ignored the crying girl on the street. He was the man who had been saved by her. And in the quiet warmth of the afternoon sun, Julian Croft knew, with a certainty that resonated in the deepest part of his soul, that he was finally, truly, immeasurably rich.